Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Mary and today's video is going to be my wrap up for the month of March. So I did not have the best reading month in March, which may or may not surprise you. I also did not have the best or most consistent upload schedule in March because I wasn't reading very much, and it's kind of hard to make videos about books when you are not really reading that many books. I am going to talk about it more in a vlog, so I won't bore you with it too much here, but I am going through some life changes at the minute. I'm filming downstairs also because my husband is working from home today, and so he's in the office where I normally film. But without further ado, I'm just going to jump into my reading stats for March. I did manage to read 6 books in March, which again is like way lower than I have been reading lately. 6 books read. I did not DNF anything in March. I read 2,721 pages, which is quite a lot. A lot of that is from me reading this behemoth, which is over 1,000 pages. So I did read this in March. Spoilers. I read 3 fantasy books in March, 2 contemporary books, and 1 nonfiction book. I also read from 2 male and 4 female authors. I read from 3 white authors, 2 non-Black POC authors, and 1 Black author. The 2 POC authors, I believe, was a Filipina, and another, the other one was a Hispanic woman. All 6 of the authors that I read from were from the USA, which again, I'm not like trying to read books from other countries necessarily. I just think it's interesting to keep track of where the majority of my reading comes from. Hope that makes sense. I also read 1 book physically, 6 books via audiobook, and 2 books with an ebook. You'll notice that that is more than 6 books, and that is because several of the books that I read, all of the books that I read, I had an audiobook for, so I did listen to them, at least partially with audiobooks, but some of them I read also physically, and then some of them I also had ebooks for that I ended up reading. Demographic-wise, I did read 4 adult books and 2 young adult books. I did not read any middle grade this month. I did not read any translated works this month, and the settings varied widely. So 2 of the books I read were historical in setting. 1 was set in Moldova, which I don't think I've ever read anything set in Moldova before, so that was interesting. I had 1 book in Washington, D.C., 1 book set in the fictional world of the Game of Thrones series. I don't know what the whole world is called. I've been calling it Winterfell in these wrap-ups, but I don't know if that's accurate. I know it's one of the like nations, but I'm beginning to realize that that's not what the whole world is called, but I don't know what the world is called, so I'm sorry if that bothers you. I also read 1 book that was set in multiple places around the US, including California and Tennessee. Those are the ones that I remember. And then I read 1 book that was set partially in Buenos Aires and partially in Cairo, Egypt. And I did also read 1 book that was set worldwide across 6 continents, which again, I will get into more as I get into my actual reviews of these books. I did not read any books with queer rep this month, which is disappointing, but just something that I've noticed again. And as far as star ratings go, I did not have any 1 or 2 stars. I did have 2 3-star books, 1 3.5-star book, 1 4-star book, and 2 5-star books. So that gives me an average rating of 3.9 stars, which is actually higher than my normal average rating. So I am pretty pleased about that. And now I'm going to go through these books in the order in which I enjoyed them, which is something that I do try to do, but I don't always do the best job of. So we're going to start off with The Key to Happily Ever After by Tiff Marcello. This is a book that I gave 3 stars. It's about these 3 sisters who live in Washington, D.C., and their parents have retired from their like wedding planning, wedding shop business, and the sisters are coming in to take over the business. And they also each have their own things going on. So 2 of the sisters end up having a sort of like romantic through line in the story, and then one of the sisters is a single mom, and she doesn't really have as much focus. So that was one thing that I was kind of disappointed by, because she also has a little bit of a romantic thing happening, but it's not really the focus of the story the same way that the other 2 sisters' love stories kind of are. It does do one of my favorite things in books, which is when you have like a setting of people who live really close quarters. So in this one, they live in a 4-plex, I think, apartment type building, but each of the sisters has their own thing, and I think their parents own it. So it's just like they have their own apartment in this building, but they also all kind of live together because they share certain common areas, which I find very fun. I just think that's a really fun concept. So I really liked that part about this book. I liked one of the romances more than the other one. There's sort of like a grumpy sunshine, enemies to lovers thing with the oldest sister, I believe, and then the guy who owns the house next door, because he has turned it into an Airbnb. So they have sort of an issue with like people having parties there. And then he ends up being involved in the wedding business because his sister, I think, or stepsister is getting married, and she's one of their brides. And so they have sort of like a heated argument, him and the oldest sister of this family, who's, I'm not gonna remember any of the names, I'm really sorry about that. They end up having this like heated argument, and then he goes the next day to their shop, which he doesn't realize is their shop, because his sister is one of their brides and they're helping her. And so they have to like interact that way. I thought their interactions were my favorite. The other one is like an old childhood friend to lovers. And then the third romance sort of subplot that happens, but not really is not really focused on, is with the single mom sister, and her baby daddy basically comes back into the picture. So it's like a second chance romance, but there's some things going on with that. And I will say, I kind of wish that this book had been 3 books that were standalone romances, because the way that it all went, I would classify this way more as contemporary than actually a romance, because it's not really about the romances, even though they do play a large part in these women's lives. So for that reason, I was kind of disappointed. It felt kind of rushed, I guess is what I'm saying. But overall, it was a fine book. I enjoyed my time reading it. 3 stars. The next book that I gave 3 stars is Heads of the Colored People by Nafisa Thompson Spires. And this is a short story collection about different Black people and how they are experiencing their lives and like different experiences that they have. So there's one who is a Black man who's married to a white woman, and like what that is like. There's also a girl who her parents are wealthy, and so they've sent her to this prestigious private school, but she's the one of 2 Black girls in the class, and it's about her like academic rivalry kind of with this other girl. And then there's also the story of both of those girls' parents emailing back and forth to each other and kind of like each trying to like peacock and stick their chest out and be like, I'm better than you, kind of. So parts of this were really, really interesting. Those were actually my favorite parts because they were all tied together. But then the more the collection went along, overall, I didn't love any of these stories. I liked some of these stories a lot, and then others I just thought were okay. But it like started to do the thing that I love in short fiction, where it like intertwines all these different pieces of fiction together into one larger narrative, which is kind of like, what is it called? There's Love and Other Thought Experiments by Sophie Ward. Does that really well. That's one of my favorite books. And then, gosh, it was one of my favorite books last year, but I'm not gonna remember what it's called, by Sequoia Nagamatsu. What is that book called? I don't know. If I remember, I will put a picture of it on the screen here. Both of those do a similar type thing, but they also are more speculative. So I think the speculative aspects works really well for them. I don't have very many thoughts about the short story collection. It's, first of all, short stories, and also it's not very long as a collection. It's less than 300 pages. So I'm glad that I read it, but it's not going to be a new favorite. And then my 3.5 star is A Clash of Kings by George R.R. Martin. And this is the second book in the Game of Thrones series. And this series, I always struggle to describe it, but it's essentially a high fantasy series in this, it's like a traditional fantasy world with like knights and armor, and there's like inklings of magic, but I'm still, to be honest with you, not quite sure what the magic actually is. Like, it's not very magic heavy to me. It's more like political movements heavy. So the premise is that there's this thing called the Iron Throne, and all of these different families from all of these different kingdoms in this realm are trying to compete sort of to get on the, it's not like a competition, but they're vying for this throne basically. And you follow different perspectives each chapter. There's all sorts of twists and turns. There's people that you know are meddling, but you don't know exactly how. More things get revealed in this one. I think it's really interesting. The main families that you're following are the Starks and the Lannisters. And then there are, of course, other characters that are not in either of those families that are sort of coming to the throne or trying to come into the throne. There's dragons, which is very interesting. The dragons have finally hit in this book. I am planning on continuing this series at this minute, and I do still plan on watching the television show, but I have not started it yet. I enjoy this book. I think it's too long to really like thrill me. And to be honest with you, my expectations were so high for this series, and there are several things in this type of classic fantasy, if you will. This isn't classic fantasy, but like this is a more classic setting and an older fantasy. There are certain things in that specific subgenre of fantasy that I am not the biggest fan of. One of those is battles. I don't like reading fight scenes. I find them a little tedious and boring. And also this book has a lot of sexual explicitness. Is that the word? Which, like, I feel like I sound like such a prude when I talk about this, but like there's a lot of like rapes and threats of rape, which is not something I like reading about. And there's a lot of like misogyny just blatantly being out there. And here's the thing, you can argue that like in the time that this was set, that is how people spoke, and that is kind of how people still speak today. And like when you're in a position of power, you have to sort of understand how things are going to work, blah, blah, blah. I've heard all of that. This is fantasy. Your fantasy world doesn't have to include that. And if one more person tells me that it wouldn't be realistic if it didn't, like, there's literally dragons and magic. What about that is realistic? I'm just argue with yourself. I don't like it. That's all I'm saying. So this will probably never become a favorite series of mine for that reason. But I am glad that I'm reading it and I'm not having the worst time. But especially in this book, I really noticed a lot. There's just a lot of like gratuitous rape and threat of rape, which I just, again, I don't find fun or interesting to read about personally. The 4-star that I had this month was called We Came, We Saw, We Left, A Family Gap Year by Charles Whelan. Did I bring it down here? I did. Here it is. I also own this book. I listened to this entirely as audio. I planned on reading part of it physically, but I didn't. And I wish that I had, because there are like maps in it of like routes that they took, which I think is really interesting. But this book, I think I described it as a family renting an RV and traveling around the US for a year. I got that, I guess, from this, which is actually a bus. It's not an RV. I don't know why I thought that this book was about that, but it's actually about this family of the Whelans. And this is a true story, by the way. It's nonfiction. And Charles and his wife, Leah, decide that they want to travel the world for a year. And there's only like 1 year where it really makes sense for them to do this. And it's their oldest daughter's, like the year after she graduates high school. So she's going to take a gap year with her family and go do this. And their other 2 kids, I think Charlie's not Charlie. Oh my gosh, I bet he is named after, CJ is their son. I bet his name is actually Charles, after the dad. That's interesting. I didn't think about that. CJ is in 8th grade, and then their daughter Sophie is a junior in high school. It's her junior year. And they decide that they were going to take their kids out of school, homeschool them for a year while they travel the world. And they go to 6 continents, and they just travel for a year. And it's interesting because, like, their ability to sort of let their kids like go off on their own excursions. Like CJ, I think, stays with them the whole time, but both of their daughters have like friends that are various places, and they just go for like 3 weeks by themselves somewhere else with their friends. It's like very rich people coded, but I just thought it was fascinating. They also talk about how like the budget for the trip, the way they paid for their housing was that they rented out the house that they own back in the States. And so the rent money that came in every month from that was what they paid for their housing while they were abroad, which I thought was a really like interesting way to do it, I guess. I thought this was fascinating. I really enjoyed it. I did read this during a vlog, so I will link the vlog. I also read Heads of the Colored People during the same vlog. So, oh, it's not out yet. I don't know why I'm telling you that then. It'll be out soon, but keep your eye out for that if you want to hear more in-depth thoughts. But I did thoroughly enjoy my time reading this. But now we're going to talk about the 2 books that did give me the 5-star feelings. The first I'm going to talk about is The Sisters of the Winter Wood by Rena Rosner. And this is a YA historical fantasy set in Moldova in 1904. What year? It says on here. 1903. I was close. This follows Liba and Leia, who are sisters, and they find out at the beginning of the book that their parents are able to turn into animals. I don't know exactly what mythology this is based on, but their dad turns into a bear and their mom turns into a swan. And one of the sisters finds out that she turns into a bear and the other sister turns into a swan. It's this story about these girls discovering this about themselves, and then their parents have to go back to their dad's hometown because as one of the bears, I think his dad dies or is going to die. And so they have to go because he needs to sort of like, not a throne, but like he has to help take over this group of bears. I don't know. This is the first book that I read this month, and I'm a little spotty on the details now, but it's just the story of these sisters being left, and then they each are told different parts of their family lore, and they have to protect each other. And it's about just that, but also it covers like anti-Semitism, because they are Jewish living in this town, and they're also like kind of ostracized from the other Jews because their mom was a Gentile who converted to Judaism to be with their dad. And then her people, the Swan people, are not happy about that. So they are coming to try to get the other Swan daughter and take her back with the Swans. So that's what the bear daughter is trying to protect her from. And there's also this like inkling of this being the last period in these girls' lives where they are girls instead of women. So it's definitely about that like life transition. Specifically, the older sister, who is the bear sister, is thinking about like what it would be like to be married and how she knows that that's a choice, like that's something she has to do relatively soon. And then she's got a little bit of a relationship with this guy Dovid, who is one of the members of the, like one of the Jewish members of society whose family, her family has always been kind of separate from, but then she sort of realizes it's got more to do with her parents' prejudice than with his parents' prejudice, and there's this like whole thing about it. I don't know, I really, really loved this book. I thought the storytelling was really well done. I really liked the mythology aspects of it, and it's not like the type of story, it's not a type of story or mythology that I'd actually like heard or read about before, so I thought that was really interesting. I loved the setting, the historical setting really worked for me in this one. And I was rooting for the romance. So, you know, I always love when that happens. And speaking of rooting for the romance, my best book of the month, my last 5-star, is What the River Knows by Isabel Ibanez, which I found out after, like when I was part way through this, that it's actually a duology. Duology is called The Secrets of the Nile. And I believe the second book comes out this year. But this book follows this girl, Inez. And Inez is an upper class woman in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and her parents live half the year in Argentina with her and half the year abroad in Cairo because they're like archaeologists or something. It's never explicitly said that that's what they are, but also there's some sort of magic that her parents have the ability to discern. And the magic in this, I will say, is never fully like explained. It's just sort of like sprinkled throughout, which leads me to believe it's more like magical realism than it is necessarily straight fantasy. But I know that magical realism has a very specific definition, and this probably doesn't meet it. But just in my mind, it's very light fantasy. But this book, at the beginning of the book, Inez's parents are missing and presumed dead in Cairo. And so she gets a letter from her uncle basically saying like, your parents are dead, I'm in charge of your money, I will give you an allowance, just let me know, and as long as it's reasonable, whatever. Inez decides she wants to go to Cairo to find her family, or her parents. So she leaves her aunt's house where she's been staying in Buenos Aires. She travels to Cairo, she finds her uncle, and then she's able to sort of like finagle her way into his digging crew for his archaeology stuff. And along the way, she meets this guy, Whit, who is British and very like dark and brooding, but they have like kind of an instant spark and connection. And it's very like, they bump heads and get on each other's nerves, but like in a cute romancy way, you know what I mean? So I was really rooting for their romance. And this book was just really exciting. Like a lot of very interesting, exciting things happen. I will say, I think the fantasy aspects of this book are the most boring part because it's a lot of like being able to shrink artifacts. They're looking for Cleopatra's tomb, by the way. Like that's what is happening in this whole book. And there are little flashes that Inez has to the past. The reader is led to believe is like flashes into Cleopatra's mind during her life. So it's not been explained why this happens. I'm assuming that's going to come out in book 2, but I have my suspicion and my theory on what's going on, but I will save it, keep it to myself just in case it ends up being true. I don't want to spoil it for other people in case you aren't thinking it. So I really enjoyed this book though. Like I loved reading it. It took me a while to read because I had the audiobook at first. It wasn't on my TBR, but I had put this book on hold because I was so interested in it, and it's a newer release. It came out last year, I think. Yeah, October of last year. I didn't realize it came out that recently and that the sequel was supposed to come out so soon. Either way, I really loved this book, and I think if you like historical fantasy, if you like a touch of romance to your fantasy, if you like a very ostentatious, precocious, like main female character, she's not as sassy, I think, as a lot of female protagonists in YA fantasy tend to be, which I appreciated. Like, I feel like she still had the same ostentatious, precocious approach to things and very like firm, outgoing, strong, brave, all of those things, but without the like constant sassing. And I think part of that is the historical setting, but I really appreciated that. I also thought that this author did a really good job of describing Cairo. Like at parts I felt like I was in Egypt, which I love. I've never been to Egypt, so how accurate are they? I don't know. If you liked The Mummy, I think the same like adventure quality is sort of woven throughout this book. And then I think Death on the Nile, because there's like a lot of mystery around what happened to Inez's parents, and you learn more about that as the book goes on as well. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book. There is one thing that happens close to the end where I feel like, not that the author fumbled, but in order for the thing to have the emotional impact that I think the author wanted it to have, I feel like there should have been more time taken earlier in the novel to establish that. I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm not going to say more than that, but like something happens and I was kind of like, oh, okay. But I felt like it was supposed to be this very powerful emotional moment. because the character is feeling some very powerful emotional things. But for me, the reader, I was like, all right, and so maybe if you've read it, you understand what I'm talking about. But those are the 6 books that I read in March. Hopefully this was a relatively quick wrap up, as I didn't have a ton to talk about. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books and how you felt about them. Also, let me know what you read in March. Like this video if you enjoyed watching it. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos from me. I am trying to go back to posting 2 videos every single week, so we'll see how that goes. And I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!